Hello, my name is Zachary DeSando, and I'll be telling you why Generation Z is the most depressed. Now, in the 1940s, the way we solved mental health issues was a lobotomy, which is when a surgeon would sever the connection to your prefrontal cortex, which is a part of your brain that was in charge of your perspective memory, your cognitive flexibility, and many other things. Then in the 1950s to 1960s, medication became more of the norm, but was also met with this negative stigma and usually met with the saying of just stop being sad, brush it off, just get over it. Now we are in the present times where mental health is acknowledged, diagnosed, and talked about, and even prescribed a medication if need be, without a negative stigma. But the question is, why is Generation Z depressed? They're in constant fear at school, constant stress about their performance at school and how they will afford their education, and the state of our government and the decisions they make for us. Now, why would a student be afraid at school? Well, 20% of students aged 12 to 18 years old have admitted to being bullied in 2019 alone. And the thoughts that these victims had towards their bullies was that 56% believed the bully had more influence with others than them. 50% believed they had more social influence, meaning they were much more popular, what they said went. And 40% believed their bully was stronger and larger than them. This matters because these show that the victim felt inferior to their bully, which causes feelings of you're not good enough, which are very common in depression. Now, continue on. 1 in 4 Gen Z LGBTQ plus students felt tension at school, meaning they didn't feel safe or comfortable learning at their school where they should feel safe and comfortable. And then 48% of LGBTQ plus students also felt like their schools weren't putting out positive messages or support for them, making them feel comfortable or safe at their schools, and was just fueling the rate of depression among these students. Now, if that wasn't enough, let's talk about the shootings that happened between 2018 and 2021 alone. There have been 140 school shootings, and then 35 in 2021 alone, and in just 2022, there's been 47. And in those 47 school shootings, there's been about 132 deaths and injuries. I remember back in 2019 when I was attending Harold Washington College, we were escorted out of the building because of a possible active shooter threat. My mom called me 30 minutes later after she got the message from the city colleges and just made sure I was okay. This wasn't my first experience with a possible school shooter, though. Back in 2017, with my senior year in high school, I had a classmate who made a lot of concerning paintings for our art exhibition project towards the end of our senior year. In those paintings was our art room, which we studied in every day, and in those paintings were our other classmates who were painted and were clearly deceased in the images. Now, he was sent away to get help, but that left a message to the rest of us of, were we safe? Were we going to be okay? Would we graduate in June of 2017? And the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia Research Institute have found school shootings cause traumatic stress symptoms that can manifest as anxiety and depression among youth, staff, and parents even. Now, when you're not worrying about whether or not you're going to walk out of your school alive, you have to worry about, are you performing well enough? Are you going to be able to afford your next semester? Now, we heard it all throughout our lives. Do well in school to get into a good college. And you got to get into a good college so you can get a good career. That type of pressure is the weight of the world on a teenager's shoulders. And if you don't go to college, then you're seen as a failure to society and sometimes your own family. A study done by the CDC back in 2019 showed that 37% of high school students had persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. And then from that same study, 1 in 6 students had made a suicide plan within that last year alone. And then looking into the burden of cost for an education will also cause feelings of hopelessness, which is common in depression. If you remember from my previous speech, I gave, which was the difference between U.S. and European school systems, I mentioned there was 42.8 million borrowers in the U.S. according to the Education Data website. In that same speech, I mentioned that the average tuition for an in-state school for the year is $20,090. The minimum wage in Chicago is $15 an hour. Even while looking at jobs that require an associate's and a year of experience, which I have, I was lucky to see $23 at most. That works up to $47,840 a year. This number doesn't include tax, bills, living expenses, and luxuries that are all going to be attached to that salary. Now, if you aren't convinced yet that Gen Z is the most oppressed based on those factors above, then let's look at the system that is meant to protect us, represent us, and support us. The talk of student loan forgiveness has been going on for 3 years. We love the thought of not owing that crushing debt, and the government has thrown out numbers like $50,000, $10,000, and $30,000. We have settled upon up to $20,000. Now, that's if you qualify, which everything was going well because they made a website for it, you registered for it, you were told that you were approved, you were told that you can do everything through this website, and it'll all happen by January. But then the talk of lawsuits came, and then the lawsuits actually came, talking whether or not it would be illegal. Meaning now we have to sit here and wonder, is this going to be found illegal? Will I owe my debt still? Will my debt be clearly wiped? Will I have to sit there and pay it back? Even though I couldn't pay it back before the deferments, and I won't be able to pay it back even after the deferments. That makes us wonder, what will happen here? Now, let's put that dread to the side for now. Same-sex marriage was legalized across the country in 2015. People were getting married, everybody was having a great time, and my friends were planning their own marriages. But recently, there's been Roe versus Wade, which was overturned by the Supreme Court. And now many are wondering whether or not same-sex marriage was going to be next on terms of being overturned by the Supreme Court. Because the 14th Amendment was brought into argument with Roe versus Wade, which is the same amendment that was used in the same-sex marriage argument way back in 2015. And because of that, it has people wondering, will my marriage be illegal? Will I just be considered another person living with a roommate inside a house that we purchased together? Will our legal documents be null and void because we aren't legally married? We aren't recognized as a couple. Now, we can talk about the lack of funding for mental health and the health budget as well, which is about 0.5% out of 5.5% health budget that the U.S. gives yearly. Or we can talk about the lack of involvement the government has in helping this, but we will leave that for another day. What needs to happen is we need to look into maybe a little bit of a higher health budget, specifically for mental health. Maybe we need to look into the idea of trying to make schools feel safer. Do we need to put stricter laws on guns? Who knows? Because at this point, I as a person from Gen Z, I don't know what would make this better anymore. Because would you as a person be able to sit there and tell me you would be mentally well and not suffer from depression in the slightest if you were a part of Gen Z that constantly faced fear going to school, stressing about performing well while affording it not to be a failure, and watching the same government that is supposed to serve us and make decisions for us do things that go against us and put us in a worse position than we already were? As someone in Generation Z, I can't say that at all. What I can say is I wonder how I didn't end up as another statistic in the numbers that would be mentioned in a future speech. All I can see is that my generation has been the most oppressed throughout these recent years, and almost seems like there is no end in sight. Something needs to change. Thank you and have a good night.